Hi all, I'm where we left off in the previous episode, over here at the map temple, where I just finished terraforming this entire island with a custom landscape. So needless to say, I need a break from aesthetic builds for now. Time to get back to redstone. So here I am again, sorting out all of the items left over from the previous project. This is honestly starting to get a little bit annoying, which is why I would like to make a storage system that does this all for me. And I believe I found the perfect design. So once again, I'm going to be using Lightmatica to create a schematic of exactly what I want to make here. And I'm going to be talking a lot more about what this massive contraption is, how it works and who designed it. But first things first, this thing uses up quite a lot of items. As you can see here in the material list, there's a lot going on, and mainly being there is a lot of wood that I'll be needing for the chests and the hoppers and the pistons and things like this. So first things first, I'm going to go ahead and cut down some trees, as I'm not quite ready to make a wood farm just yet. I did actually cut down twice the amount of trees that you're seeing in this clip. However, unfortunately, the rest of the replay footage got corrupted and it just won't let me render it. So unfortunately for now, we're just left with this. From here I expanded this storage so that I could AFK my temporary iron farm, plus I've also been AFKing the witch farm in between episodes, so I now have lots of redstone and sticks so that I can begin crafting up all of the items. Finally, after crafting up about 14-ish shulker boxes worth of items, there was one thing left that I haven't gotten yet in this world, and that is honey. So I headed out to some cherry biomes to pick up some bee nests and get my hands on some bees. I brought them back to my home and I placed them in a little box so that I could breed up the bees and collect some honeycomb. I used these to craft up some beehives so that I could transfer them from the nests to the beehives for the farm, and then what I wanted to do was make sure that each of those had exactly 3 bees in them. And so the way I did this was I just kept breeding them up, and then once it turned night, which I obviously checked by sleeping in the bed, I could see that no more bees were going in the hives, which meant they were full. So I went through and collected them all up so that I could begin building myself a honey farm. By now, you're probably thinking to yourself, this looks very different to what you're used to seeing when it comes to honey farms. And that's because it relies on a different method. It doesn't use the signal strength method, because traditionally, if you fire an empty bottle into your beehive and it doesn't have honey in it, it will just dispense the empty bottle, and so the output for your farm would be the empty bottles and the full honey bottles, which is obviously something that you don't want. That's why people use a signal strength. Once it reaches a signal strength of 5, you know that it's full of honey, and that's when it dispenses a bottle. But what this system does is it basically purposely dispenses the empty ones and reuses it for the next one and the next one, and it kind of cycles it around the farm like this, using the clock which would usually be running up top. And so what you're left with is some empty bottles just going around in circles, waiting for one of the beehives to fill up with honey. And once one of them does, it will of course collect the honey bottle, and as it comes around here, it just simply gets filtered out, and once one gets filtered out into the output, it dispenses a new bottle into the system so that there's always some bottles in here for it to operate in. And it works perfectly, and it has a lot of advantages as well. One of the main advantages for me is that this uses about a quarter of the amount of hoppers that the traditional ones would usually use, which is really great as typically hoppers cause quite a bit of lag. But it's also much more compact. You can see there's no big redstone lines coming off the side of this. But I think that the main advantage which would draw people to using this method is that it doesn't require you to have an insane amount of empty bottles in it. You see, usually you want to make sure that the dispensers are entirely full of bottles, so that would have to be 9 stacks, because if it dispenses a bottle and it picks up the honey, it won't drop it, it will go inside of the dispenser unless it's full. But because this system doesn't use that, this entire farm can run with just one empty bottle. And so you can see here I do have, some extras for it to run whilst I AFK, but this in another farm, for example, would only be 3 dispensers, and so you would need so many more bottles, but this just doesn't require it. And I think that's really good, especially early game, since this even uses in some ways less resources. The only disadvantage I would say to this farm is that it can be a little bit loud, and that's because of course you have this clock that's going around clicking all of the dispensers and droppers. But this isn't too big of an issue for me because I have my farming district where I have all of my farms set up and I just AFK them per my need. So this would only really be an issue if you plan on keeping this in your base or something like that. But otherwise it is very easily expandable and stackable, and I definitely recommend building it. Its original design is by somebody called Ian X04. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. He came up with this concept and it's a really great idea. I kind of tweaked it a little bit, as I always do, mainly being replacing the flowers with the azalea leaves, as that's just one less thing that you don't need. And then yeah, that's about it for this thing. And so after AFKing this farm for a couple of hours, I had all I need to make myself about a stack of honey blocks, which was far more than I needed to start work on putting together my storage system. Now you wouldn't know this about me, but I am a massive fan of storage tech. I find it so interesting, and so I'd already began working on putting together my own storage system, which uses various components from other creators as you would for something like this. But along my searches to find the bits that I needed, I actually came across a storage system that had already been put together using many of the mechanics that I was already planning on using myself, and so I decided to just go with this design and tweak it a tiny bit to my needs. This original design is built by J-Roy, and it's in collaboration with Mooney, who are excellent redstone builders, and this storage system is a redstone engineering masterpiece. It's really good because it sorts every single item in the game, but it does it through a multi-item sorter, which means that you're not dedicating one chest per item, but rather entire categories into rows of chests. And I'll talk more about what that means, how it works, and kind of the specifics as I put this together later on. But the main thing to note here is it really has 2 major systems, which is the multi-item sorting towards the top section of the contraption, and then towards the bottom it also has an additional bulk loading system so that you can store large quantities of certain items that you'd get a lot of, such as stone and netherrack and whatever you may farm, for example. And what's really great about this system is there's a lot of work that's been put into it in terms of the inputs and the outputs and fail-safe mechanisms. You know, you've got some hopper locking involved in it. You've even got a chunk loader which I've added in. It doesn't include a chunk loader, but it kind of has a system that enables you to attach one to it. And so it's got all of these things, and it just creates an all-round perfect system that you can throw into your survival world, and it's so great. I certainly won't be taking credit for this design. However, if you want to download the schematic of my version, where I've tweaked a couple of things such as adding in my own chunk loader and changing up the item filter categories to my own liking, as well as switching out the aesthetics on the inside, and also building it with some survival friendly materials such as mainly using stone bricks for all of the fill building blocks. I do have that schematic available in the description. However, of course, on J-Roy's channel he does have his original as well. So I'm going to go ahead and build this thing up, and then we'll look at the details a little closer later on. Well, everything is now built up. However, we can't get too excited just yet, as it technically isn't operational, and that's because we still need to encode all of the filters. Now, because this sorts every item in the game, what that means is, for the most part, we need to get 2 of every single item, and that shouldn't be too difficult. I already have most of the items. However, there are a couple of things, even some things I haven't even gotten yet, that are going to take a little bit of time. But fortunately, we also have the bulk items that need sorting, and these only require 1 item, and as the name suggests, they're in bulk, so we do have quite a lot of them, and so I've already gone ahead and collected all of these items up, so we can start putting these in immediately. So let's just head out of this storage system, and I'll show you exactly how you can do this, especially in case you want to build this system yourself. So these are the bulk sorters over on this side. I'm just going to break this glass and make sure I pick that up, otherwise it could cause an issue. I've already put them in my inventory in the right order, and as you can see, I've also pre-filled these hoppers to have the placeholder items so that these filters work. And so we're just going to come through here and place in all of the filtered items. Now you'll notice that I'm just putting in a couple of full blocks of things like iron and coal blocks and redstone blocks instead of the actual redstone dust or the ores themselves, and that is because I plan to actually use the auto crafters in future updates to create the block versions, and so it's kind of in anticipation of that. So that's it for all of the items on that side. Now let's go ahead and move over to this side, which I actually need to make sure I do from this direction to make sure everything is in the right order. And you'll notice for things like these gas tiers here, I'm actually including certain items that I anticipate I will have bulk amounts of in the future, as I haven't made those farms yet, but I certainly would like to. And then for all of the filters that don't have any of the items we're sorting out in, we need to make sure that we're filling them with an extra filter slot, just so that it doesn't end up breaking the system, as otherwise pretty much anything would get in there. So now that I've done that, I'm just out here, for example, I just went and got a few bits that I was missing, mostly the jungle stuff, and I also have some wooden bits on me so that I can start working on the wood categories to kind of give you an example of what I'll be doing here. So right now, for example, I'm just crafting up all of the oak bits. I'm going to need 2 of everything, and then that includes things like the stairs and the slabs, and now I even need to do things like place down some of these logs so that I can get the stripped versions, and then you have to make the wood blocks, and we're going to have to strip 2 of these, which means we'll even need a few more, and you can see how this starts to take a while. And so what we'll do is start placing all of these bits inside. We've got the different types of logs and then the stripped versions. We've got our planks and stairs. I like doing everything in a logical kind of order because it enables you to keep track of things quite easily. We've got the doors, the trapdoors, and I even put the buttons and pressure plates in here. I don't like putting them in the redstone categories because I usually use them for aesthetic builds. And then the signs, and you can see I've already placed in the leaves and the saplings, and then you want to fill all the other slots in with named items, and it requires quite a few of them, so I'll actually have to go back and craft up a whole load more, because that is an example of just one category. And then we've got all these chests here, not only on this side but also over here. These are all of the categories that we've got. So I'm going to go ahead and start working on this, and I'll update you on some of the interesting items that I collect along the way. And I suppose whilst I'm doing all of this, I'm going to acquire quite a few bits, so I can already start putting the system to use and just throwing all these bits in here where they belong. Firstly, I grabbed some red sand so that I could craft some red sandstone, which up until this point I hadn't crafted a single piece of. I did the same thing with mud so that I could craft some mud bricks as well. Then I headed out in search of some woodland mansions, because I wanted to get myself some more totems since I ran out from the ones I got previously, and this was so that I could jump immediately into getting all of the materials from the deep, dark cities. As you would know, these are very dangerous places to be, so I wanted to make sure I was prepared. For the most part, collecting all of these items is really easy along the outskirts of the city. However, there were some items I needed in the loot chests, so I had to just jump down and grab them, and I did get lucky to start with. However, eventually I was faced with a warden. I ended up visiting and raiding 2 entire cities, which enabled me to get everything that I needed except for 2 of the smithing templates, which I'll be getting later on. From here I decided to craft myself a maxed fishing rod, which I hadn't yet done, so that I could just do a little bit of fishing to get some of the fish that I needed for this system as well. Now I wouldn't say that this is something that's necessary, however, because I was dedicated to getting as many possible different items as I could in this system, I used chunk paste to go out in search of some notch apples as well. Next up, I needed those smithing templates. I already had most of them, so I just needed to visit a few common structures around the world. And the most notable of them being the jungle temple. I actually ended up having to visit 7 until I was able to find what I needed. I also decided to resummon yet another ender dragon so that I could pick up some dragon's breath, as I never got round to doing that before. Traditionally, you're unable to get the tall grass and large ferns in the game, as the shears just give you the smaller versions. However, something not many people may know is that in the villages you can actually find these items in the loot chests, and they're not as rare as you might think. So I headed over to a savanna biome and got lucky finding 2 in a chest immediately, and then I also headed over to some taiga biomes to get myself the large ferns as well. Getting all of the different pieces of copper was a real pain, as you can't just place them all down and AFK it and let them all oxidize, as you need all of the different states for all of the different types of blocks. So I was left here for 2 hours watching these things turn and grabbing them as they did. And so that meant getting 16 of each type so that I could get 2 waxed and 2 unwaxed for all 4 different stages. From here I had to get brushing, as I wanted to pick up all of the different pottery sherds. These are pretty simple to get for the most part, however they can be pretty spread out as they're in all kinds of different biomes and even in some cases structures as well. This sent me towards finding myself my first trail in this world, and I ended up excavating the entire thing to find all of the bits I needed, as well as all of those smithing templates that I was missing from before. Whilst doing this brushing, I also came across a sniffer egg, which was perfect because I then wanted to put together a kind of starter sniffer farm, which just takes advantage of the main mechanics that they have, so that I could of course get some of the seeds and the different plants that they provide. Finally, much like the tall grass and large ferns, there is one more cheeky item I snuck into this system, and that was the suspicious sand from earlier. Traditionally, you cannot pick this item up, however, yet again, some people may not know, if you actually let these blocks drop for more than 30 seconds, using something like a bubble column or cobwebs like I do, they do actually drop in entity form, and so I grabbed them and put them into the system as well. What an ordeal putting this thing together it has been. However, finally I can say that this thing is finished, so I think it's a perfect opportunity to just take a look at all of the features that it has and show you how I've organised all of my bits here. So this is the system itself. As you can see, it's comprised of one long chest hall. Down the middle there isn't any soul sand, however along the sides there is. So if you've got soul speed on your boots, you can speed down here, which certainly makes walking around and finding the bits you need nice and fast, much nicer. And so there's kind of 2 main sections. There's this bit here, which is all kinds of technical things, and then you get the main chest hall in this section. Towards the back you've got all of the different utilities that you may want to use, including a jukebox of course, which is an essential part of every base, and then this here is the input for all of the shulker boxes that are used within the bulk loaders, so you kind of just put those in there like that. And as you can see, there's even a light indicator to show you if they run out. So if you look along the top here, you can see all of the different blocks indicating the different multi-item categories that we just put together. And so it's all of the usual things that you would expect. As you can see, you've got all of the items and they just fill up from the bottom to the top. And then in certain sort of categories where I have a lot of certain items that I don't want to put in bulk, I just threw the shulker boxes up at the top one so that it doesn't disrupt anything. And yeah, that works out very well. I've used as many full blocks instead of items as possible, just to reduce the amount of items in the system and of course keep things less laggy where possible. Most of these are pretty self-explanatory. You know, you've got things like your bamboo, or maybe your redstone and your copper. However, there are 3 categories that do require a little bit of knowledge as to what's in them if you've put them together yourself, as they're a little bit more random. And those ones are this one right here, this one, and this one. The first one is this one right here, and this is what I call the multi-item category, as in here we've got some smaller categories that don't fit in anywhere else that have kind of all been crammed together into this one here. And so you can kind of see what they are, and you just kind of have to memorize them if you want to use this system. The second one is what I like to call valuables or very rare items, and so these are things like those suspicious sands that we got, and other things that are maybe a little bit rarer or things that don't really fit in anywhere else. And you can see that there are a couple of items missing from this category. In fact, I've made a book here which lists all of the things I haven't put in it yet. I could go out and get these now, however I'm planning on exploring a lot of these different items in future episodes, so it wouldn't make sense to do it now, and I'll just get these later on down the road. The final category is this one here, and this is what I call the miscellaneous category, and as you can see it's just all those other bits that are left over, and if you know what's in the other categories it's pretty obvious what's going to be left in here. However, it's worth taking a look at if you're planning on building this yourself. Now, one thing you'll notice from the inside is that I have not sorted out all of these spectral arrows, and that's because there's just so many different variations of them, and since I certainly won't be crafting them or picking them up in game, I decided it wouldn't be necessary to incorporate them into the system. However, as you can see, I did incorporate the slowness arrows right here, and that's because you do actually pick them up from the strays, and so I figured it'd be useful to incorporate. So if we head back down into the storage, you can also see that there is a bottom row of chests, and these are for the bulk loaders. However, these aren't your traditional bulk loader, these are something called a hybrid bulk loader, and what's special about this is it fills this chest up with the items that would be going in the shulker boxes first, and only once this is full will it start filling the full shulker boxes and putting them into this chest right here. And what's really cool about this system is you also get a notes block here. So let's say you use up every single one of these items and all of these items, but there are still items inside the shulker box filling up. You usually wouldn't have access to them. However, if you hit this, it will break it and bring it up here so that you can actually retrieve every single item in the system, which is super intuitive. And as I mentioned previously, some of these I've turned into block form as I'm planning on using the auto crafters when they do come out. Now, of course, many of these categories will change over time as you get more items and updates come out. However, this is just sort of what I've done for what I've got so far. However, there is still some items such as these prismarine bits, which I pretty much have none of, that I do definitely know I will be making farms of in the future. So let's move over to this bit here and see what else we got going on. Firstly, as these will indicate, this is the overflow, so if any items that are being sorted out into these chests go in and find that the final chest is full up to the very brim, they will go ahead and start filling up in these chests right here. And then we have the unsortable, so any of those items that don't get sorted, such as named items, or maybe some items that you haven't incorporated into it after an update, would end up in here. Finally, you have your unstackable items. So these are kind of sorted out into 3 categories. You've got your shulker boxes, you've got potions, and then you've just got all of the other unstackables. Now, I do know that you can of course use a lathe to sort out all of the unstackables. However, for me right now, that's just not something that's going to be necessary. As we come to the right here, you can see that we've got a lot of different bits going on. Firstly, there's some barrels, just for some general storage so that you can throw things in. For example, I've got some storage sticks in here, why not? And then what this system here is it's basically a mini shulker box display system. So for example, you can put in all of your food boxes and have it on display, and then once you take all of the food out, it'll go ahead and replace it with a new one. And so I've done that for food, I've got it for rockets, and then in the future I'll also have it for totems, which I don't quite have many of just yet. Now, over on the other side, firstly we have a smelter over here. This is your kind of bog standard setup. You put all of your coal in here, you put all of the items you want to smelt at the top, and then they will end up at the bottom, like this glass I've been smelting right here. And finally, this is the input. So flicking this lever will lock this chest so that you can fill it up with stuff, and it won't start going through the system until you decide you want it to, in case you want to sort of let that build up and do it in big bulk loads. And you can literally chuck absolutely anything in here, including shulker boxes, unstackables, raw items, whatever you want, and it will go ahead and take care of it. The only exception to that is you of course cannot place in your filter items, as that is going to mess with it. But that is of course why we make filter items, specifically items that you won't find anywhere else. And you'll notice that on either of these sections there are some indicators. So if it does overflow, which I mentioned before, it will go ahead and indicate that it's broken as well, which is really handy. And then when the system is on, these lights will turn on, which also indicates that the chunk loader is on. So if we head below, you can actually see that down here there is a chunk loader, which is this portal setup, and every time the system is on, this will go ahead and run and keep all of the chunks that this storage system is in loaded so that it doesn't break when you leave the area. And if we go through the portal, you can see what it looks like on the other side. It's exactly the same, and I believe this is actually Ilmango's design of portal loader. However, there are quite a few different ones you can use. Anything will do the job. And so now with this thing built up, I think it's time to head back to our home and dismantle the old storage that we have down here in the basement. I've already naturally gone ahead and emptied this thing out as I was taking all of the items I needed for the system. And so this thing has served us well, but finally it's nice to have an upgraded version. Now I said that I've sorted out all of the items, however that's not entirely true, as a couple of them I did put aside, especially some of the newer items I got from trying to find all these items today, and so I think it'd be a great opportunity to take all of these and chuck them into the system to give this thing a proper test and just see how long it takes to sort this stuff out. So in here we've got, what is this, about 8 or 9 shulker boxes, and we'll see how long this all takes. Well, as you can see, this right here is kind of part of the input, and it's just putting in the very last few items right now. So that means that it should be almost done, and that's taken around about 30 minutes. It's hard to say exactly, as when I did first turn it on, I did realise that I forgot to put a couple of named items in, so one section of it broke and I had to fix it. But then once I got that working, it did start running very, very smoothly. So this light is actually going to stay on probably for quite a few minutes after it's finished sorting, and that is because you want to give it time to kind of finish going through the cycle, as if it had have turned off right there when that had finished going through, of course this would break. So that will stay on as long as it needs to filter through all of the items and get them in the chests. This unsortable section is actually very handy. I noticed a few moments ago that there were some slime balls in there, and it turned out I never actually put that inside of the filters, and so I was able to identify that and then go ahead and update it so that in our random section we now have these slime balls, and as you can see this is really filling up quite a bit now. Right, well the lights just turned off, which means everything is done and dusted. So I think what we'll do to end things off here is just go through and show you all of the items that I've got so far, and you can kind of get a good idea of what all of the categories are. So first of all, of course, we have all of the different wood types here. These are going to be very useful as building blocks. Not so sure about the cherry and the acacia, however. And then for the crimson, I've actually got both the warped and the regular type, the crimson, together, as I don't believe they really need separate categories. I usually don't use too much of it. You've got the bamboo here, kind of natural blocks, deep slate. We've got some polished granite. Well, it's the granite, the diorite and the andesite all together, with the exception of the raw materials being in the bulk bit over there. Then we've got the different sandstones, the other dirt blocks, we've got quartz, stone bricks, we've got all of the different mud and brick types over here. Then you've got nether items, You've got end items, and this is going to be some of the colours. So we've got the concretes over there, the walls, the terracottas, the glasses, and then you've also got all of the dyes, and then all of the candles and banners go in here. And then we've got the new sculk stuff, the prismarine, the copper, the corals. You've got all of your different ores, and then all of your redstone bits. Your utilities go in here. That's a really useful category to have, I find. And then these are the multi-item categories, as I like to call them. You've got all your different plants, and there is a lot of those for sure. As you can see, it's filling up quite a bit. And then we've got the special items here. We've got food, and then these are the random items that have really filled up as well. And of course we've got some things like the templates and the sherds, which I don't imagine will fill up anytime soon. Plus down here we've got all of the non-stackables, which I've got quite a handful of now. And then there's also some potions there that we got today. And so yeah, there it is. That is everything in my system, and it's nice to see that everything is up and running now. And so no doubt this storage system is going to be so useful, and it's certainly going to help me put together all of the future projects in this world.